The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to Tell Us Why, a podcast for the financial freedom community. If you're looking to succeed in your quest for financial freedom, make sure you join us every week as we, along with our guests, discuss different stories of success, how they were achieved, and how you can do the same. And of course, we ask them to tell us why. Here are your hosts, Jack and Mike.
Welcome to the Tell Us Why podcast. I'm your host, Jack Darrell, here kind of alongside my co-host.
You're kind of far.
Michael Ketchen.
Close.
Mike, what are we doing here today?
We got something different going on. We're trying out something. It's either going to be the best idea we've had so far or the worst, as I said.
Tank, no big deal.
We've got a live audience. We're doing our meetup, but we also have our expert panel. So there's a lot of pressure on you guys to be great. You're like the dream team, okay? There's dozens and dozens of people out there dying to hear what you all have to say. So Keith is already nervous. So we are very excited, as Jack mentioned. We're going to get into this panel of experts. We're going to get into basically questions that we had taken from the Tell Us Why community.
Yep.
We fired off. We're going to go through it. And it's going to be a great show. But before we do that, I think it's going to be a great show.
Okay.
Before we do that, I think we're going to hear who we're brought to you by, right?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Are you sick of being treated like just another number by large insurance companies? Do you want a more personalized experience with somebody that you can trust? With Keith Monti, that's exactly what you'll get. Keith is an experienced professional who can design an insurance plan tailored to fit your specific needs. With access to over 30 insurance carriers, Keith is able to shop numerous markets to find a price that works for you. So if you want an insurance agent that you can rely on and one that has your best interests at heart, then call or text Keith today on 978-241-2363. That's 978-241-2363. Keith Monti. He'll get you covered. Are you looking to finance your next deal quickly and reliably with less hassle and paperwork? QS Private Lending is one of the oldest and largest hard money lenders to real estate investors in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Our quick and simple short-term loans require no appraisals and have enabled hundreds of builders and investors to profitably acquire and renovate thousands of residential and commercial properties. To experience the QS difference for yourself, call or text Luke Conroy today at 315-323-0250. That's 315-323-0250. QS Private Lending.
All right, so we're back. Thank Keith for that. Luke's out there too. We get the dream team here. So Mike, we want to kick it off?
I think we should.
You guys ready?
You want to give them a quick
Keith,
little introduction? You're going to tell them who's who here?
Oh yeah, we should probably do that, yeah.
Again,
go ahead.
This takes 5 seconds in. All right, so we've got Keith Monti, okay, our resident commercial insurance expert. We've spent a lot of time with Keith getting me out of trouble half the time. And then we've got attorney Kathryn Morin, as you'll know from previous Tell Us Why episodes. She's a commercial real estate attorney, as I would say estate planning expert, but doesn't do as much of it anymore, but she can. And we've got Kory Reynolds, Mr. Billable, as I call him, because my wife hates how much time I spend on the phone and how much it costs to talk on the phone. But the whole idea around tonight was to get some questions from the community, and we joke, but really this is our dream team. You've heard us talk about it a lot. We run all of our business decisions through this panel. So what we wanted to do for the Tell Us Why community with the meetup is ask all of these beautiful, lovely people who agreed to this, thank God, to come on and ask some of these questions and really leverage these resources. So the way this is going to work is we've got 5 listener questions. If we get to all 5, great. If not, no worries, and we'll go from there. But are you guys ready to go?
Absolutely.
Ready? Keith, breathe. You'll be good. I got you.
I'm ready.
So, Jack, why don't you tell the people at home what is the first listener question, and then direct it to whoever you want to direct to, and we'll jump in from there.
All right, so the first one I think is a great one. It is, how do you recommend new investors go about finding the best real estate-specific you? Insurance agent, lawyer, CPA.
I clarify, because Keith's like, man, Jack doesn't know how to write. I don't even know how to word this question. What does this mean, Mike?
So, yeah.
If you ask Michael Ketchen what things mean, we've all hit the 7th level of hell. So why don't we actually start with Keith on that note? Because we spend a lot of time talking. I know there's a couple investors in the room, people at home. I'm in a new market. I'm just getting into real estate. How do I find a real estate-specific or commercial-specific, real estate-specific insurance agent? How do you recommend going about that?
So for me personally, just general in life, I think word of mouth advertising is the best way to find an expert at anything.
Gotcha.
So my advice to a new investor would be find a seasoned investor that's done really well in the industry, and find out who they use as an insurance agent, find out if they're happy with their insurance agent, and then really kind of go after those people, because a seasoned, successful investor has created their network, such as yourself and Jack up here, of people that took them a long time to go through bumps and challenges to create. So rather than recreating the wheel, starting over, just kind of mimic what some of the seasoned investors have done and go after the same people that they use. The one point about this that I would want to make is you got to find an insurance agent that's responsive. You know, when you're a new investor,
It's like a real estate agent.
it's like there's a lot to learn.
Real estate agent show coming next week.
There's a lot to learn right off the bat.
Yep.
So you need somebody that's going to answer your texts, your calls, your emails, nights, weekends, holidays, vacations. I mean, to me, responsiveness is the best thing that you can really get from an agent. And I don't think I've had a vacation in 7 years that you haven't ruined for me. So, you know.
You think you know somebody. Anyways, you're no longer
Talk to you on
sponsoring the show.
Christmas. All right.
I'm going to save Kathryn for last because I've learned a lot on the other side of why I think attorney is different. So I'm going to jump to Kory because I tell people this all the time, and I don't want to lead you to your answer, but what kills me, one thing specifically, one of the reasons we all invest in real estate is taxes, right? And honestly, who the hell likes paying taxes? We hate paying taxes. You don't want to pay taxes. And I must ask this man about, I don't know how many times a year, to not pay taxes. The goal is don't pay taxes. So how do you recommend, because this is overwhelming. I mean, you talk to people about depreciation and tax incentives, and half the time I'm making the shit up as I go, and then I call you to clarify.
Exactly.
How does exactly. How does someone find the Kory Reynolds, the commercial specific, real estate specific CPA? How do you recommend that?
Yeah, so first I'd say starting off exactly with what Keith said, where you go to your network, you start coming to these types of events, or the other Manchester event that's gone, or New Hampshire Real Estate Investors Association, those types of networks that happen all the time. There's a lot of investors who are in similar situations where they're looking for professionals, or they have professionals that they're already using. So that's a great place to start, to find someone who can I'd say find at least a couple that you might be interested in giving a call, whether you happen to meet the professional at the event or just a referral. And I always like to tell people to call at least 2 people, just because you'll get a different vibe. And, you know, this is someone you're going to be talking with on a regular basis, working with all the time. You want to make sure that it's a good fit. You know, if it's someone that you can't picture them having an open conversation with them on a regular basis, it's really not going to work out, and probably you're not going to build a relationship that's really going to, you know, that push them to be the best professional they can for you and provide the best level of service.
Wow.
And I'd say also, when you have those conversations, you're not necessarily looking for, you know, if you go out and you try and find the absolute best and most knowledgeable real estate CPA or attorney or whatever it might be, you need to keep in mind that what you're looking for someone who's a good fit for you, but you also want to have an understanding that that individual, that you are a good fit for them. Because if you are not a good fit for them, you're going to be at the bottom of their list. They're not going to be a big priority for you. So if you go to, if you go to the extreme, you go into the big 4 accounting firms, they're not going to put a lot of time into a very small investor, and they're going to charge you an exorbitant fee. Or even, as Mike has said, we're certainly not the cheapest around. If you only have a couple rentals and you don't have any thoughts of real growth or a lot of complexity, maybe we wouldn't be a good fit, just because, the fees might become a barrier to you either just giving me a call to ask for information or talk through things. So you need to make sure that it's a good fit both ways. So I think that's something that's very easy to be overlooked. People are just like, I want the top tier everything. Well, you can always change if you need to at a later date.
Grow and kind of
exactly.
Go through it.
It's great if you can start off with top tier, but if you don't need top tier, at least have that consideration. Is this a good fit both ways? And then as far as real estate expertise, I always like to say, when you go into these conversations with people, maybe just have a few questions related to your portfolio, what you're trying to do. And maybe it's things that you already know the answer from. You've already received an answer from somebody else, but it's something more on the technical side. Maybe it's, vacation rental rules or house hacking. And just ask them, a technical question about it, and get the idea of, do they know this stuff well, or do they make it up an answer on the spot and it's wrong? Or are they honest about, I don't remember the particulars right now, I can get back to you. Not everybody is going to remember every rule all the time. The tax code is incredible. But you know,
Kory, you're like a computer. Don't sell yourself short.
You're
very good with that.
But
the good thing, like you said, the relationship there
Yeah.
to go to it, to kind of stay on track so we get to Kathryn. But
Yeah,
essentially, I
absolutely.
made the cut and Jack didn't. So is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You need to have a
I
path.
called him a week ago. We're good.
All right, so staying with that, so Kathryn, let everyone know, and the reason I wanted to save the attorney for the end, because what I've seen is we've grown a lot this year. I can't believe just how many different attorneys, like you have spoiled me, young lady. I'm getting a dose of reality now, and I got to tell you, they suck. So how do you find, if you're doing flipping, if you're doing multifamily investing, if you're doing BRRRRs, if you're now doing development, which we're getting into, if you're doing all of these different things, and I know as real estate investors, the riches are in the niches. How does someone find, not that you could ever be duplicated, how does someone find the Kathryn Morin of commercial real estate as attorney if I'm just starting out?
What these two gentlemen said really covered the bulk of what you look for and how you focus. Of course, from the attorney perspective, we are licensed in each state separately. So you have to think about where your portfolio is and where it's going to be. I happen to be licensed in 3 jurisdictions, which, not to toot my own horn, but that's a lot because the laws are different in every single state. So that is kind of a threshold issue you want to look for. If you are in New Hampshire and you're going to stay in New Hampshire, then an attorney licensed only in New Hampshire is perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. Most attorneys are licensed only in one jurisdiction. We're a border state, or my office is near the Massachusetts border, near the Maine border. So because I represent a lot of builders and developers who cross those borders, I chose to be licensed in 3 jurisdictions. But that's one of the threshold issues is where can the attorneys that you're talking to practice? The other thing, how do you choose them or how do you identify them are the same ways these two gentlemen have said. One of the most particular things is what Kory just said is talk to them. Can you understand what they are saying?
Which is not always easy with attorneys.
If if they are talking here for where from party of the first part nonsense,
I don't know what that means.
be real with me. I am real with my clients. I make sure my clients understand. My client is a decision maker. I'm an advisor. I never make decisions for my clients. So that open communication, that accessibility that Keith talked about, those are the same key issues across all of the professions.
Kind of interesting, good to know. So I think those are great 3 answers.
Oh, one more thing.
Yes.
Anything I say tonight is not legal advice, whether or not I represent you. Of course. It is just a general conversation.
That's why we're back, and that just cost you $420. All right, so Jack, moving on, so we all don't get billed at things we don't want to pay. Make Leo Minor pick up the tab. We got Bud here tonight.
All right, so moving on to the second questions. What are the consequences of having your properties in one LLC as you grow from an insurance, tax, and legal perspective?
And from a selfish perspective.
Yeah. This is my question. No. There it is. This is something that I want to know, but so who's going to start it off?
Kick it off with Kathryn.
Kathryn, sure.
Sure. So there are a number of different structures that are common when you are talking about setting up a company that you can scale. If you, in having an idea of what you plan for the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, is important in order to answer the question appropriately. If you believe you are going to be a one-at-a-time property, I'm going to flip. That's my thing. That's my niche. I'm going to do flips. It doesn't necessarily make sense to have more than one entity. And I always say an entity as opposed to personal because it's across the board a bad idea to do it in your own name. But the question was more, okay, at least as I understand it, if I'm going to have multiple properties at the same time, am I better off to keep them in one LLC or fracture those interests so that I hold the different properties in different LLCs or different types of properties in different LLCs? Or corporations, as the case may be. There's no right or wrong answer. A lot of it I'm going to throw to Keith because if you choose to do it in one entity, your backup plan is having sufficient insurance to cover losses that could accrue based on the interests all being held together.
So we'll jump into Keith right there. But if I understand it correctly, because one thing we've done is we've grown, and I know a lot of investors in this standpoint. You're just out there trying to find deals. So if I hear you correctly, we had Airbnb, multifamily flips. We've done a little bit of everything like a lot of people have. I know we're now in the position we're reorging because we just had to. I never thought of it through that lens, and I've heard you defer that to, and the way you just explained it makes sense. So Keith, to jump in on that, if you're insured correctly, getting insurance for a 100-unit family versus a flip, are they the same stratosphere, or is it more because the umbrella and the bridge and the bar? Like, how does that work in the insurance industry going into all of that?
So the one thing that I always tell people is the worst thing you can be is a sole proprietor. Because if you tap out an insurance with a lawsuit,
let's clarify. What's a sole proprietor? Let's assume
sole
people
proprietor
don't know
is just an individual if you own a property under your own name.
Okay. Yep.
So, and there are a lot of them out there. So I always tell people, the last thing in the world you want to be is a sole proprietor. You got to be some type of corporation. Well, it's an LLC, a C corp, an S corp. You got to have a corporate veil to protect you, because if you run out of insurance, now you're protected. Your personal assets are not going to get hit.
Gotcha.
When it comes to being an LLC, it doesn't really matter whether you have one property in one LLC, 10 properties in one LLC, 10 properties in 10 different LLCs. Really, the secret sauce there is you want to try to get as many properties as you can under the same insurance policy. Mm-hmm. And the reason for doing that is it's Insurance 101, bundling. You're going to get cheaper prices by stacking them together. What a lot of investors don't realize is that you can actually have different LLCs on the same policy. You can just list multiple names and multiple properties. A lot of people think that opens you up to added risk if you get sued, and it doesn't. The only downside to that is now they're sharing limits of coverage, so you got to really bump up your umbrella, add excess liability, excess coverage, and now even adding that excess coverage, you're still going to come out way ahead price-wise and save a lot of money.
Because you're bundling everything.
Because you're bundling.
Okay, so you got something to add?
I wanted to jump in. Kind of the second phase of my part of the conversation is, and then it'll be Kory's, is if you have separate LLCs and you are in multiple states, you're going to have to file annual reports for each LLC or corporation in every jurisdiction in which you operate. So if you have a company, I don't know, say like Commonwealth Collective, and so you are domesticated in one state, but you do business in 2 other states.
What if you don't like that state anymore?
Well, that's something that's called a reorg. That means that for each of those companies, if you have multiple companies, one for each property you own, say you own multis and you want to have an LLC for each of those multis, that's going to be only in one entity, but you have to file an annual report and the accompanying fees associated with that LLC. Here in New Hampshire, that's not a big deal. There are other jurisdictions where that can get pricey, and the calendar for doing that is not the same. But if you don't do that, you risk not being protected the way you want to be protected, because as Keith alluded to. It's called piercing the corporate veil, even though it's technically not corporate. If you don't keep those records up to date, you can be exposed more than you want to be.
And I would say I've even seen bigger real estate developers and real estate investors won't pay that annual fee, and they'll not be in good standing. And it kills me. It absolutely kills me, which now you get to tear apart everything they just said because you just did this to me. So now tell me why you want everything in different entities.
I'll hold you there saying having everything in different entities. So, I mean, clearly there's reasons, as far as Kathryn's alluded to, where you want to have separate liability. And maybe if you have $5 million in real estate, maybe you don't want to, and it's 10 different properties across different states. Maybe you don't want to pile it all in the same group because they're subject to rules in different jurisdictions. So you segregate them, especially from a liability perspective. As far as what it matters from a tax standpoint, for a standard LLC in New Hampshire and pretty much in most places, or unless, we'll leave out the more complex ways you can go, but they're pass-through entities. So if you wholly own the LLC, it's a single-member LLC. Really, for federal income tax purposes, it's what they call disregarded. They just report all the activity on your personal income tax return anyways, and you pay your share of tax through your personal income tax return. Gotcha. And same thing if you go to a multi-member LLC, a partnership. Having well, your share of the income flows through and is taxed on your personal income tax return. So whether it's held in 10 different LLCs or one, your share of income is still flowing through and hitting your personal income tax return. Where it will start to matter as far as how things are structured for the state fees is certainly one, and then professional fees can be another. And this is where it comes, especially on the tax preparation side of things. I've had conversations with folks where they have, 5 LLCs, it's all of them are 50-50 ownership or whatever it might be. So they have to file a partnership return for each one. But each one is, a $200,000 single family rental, so it's already not cash flowing a serious amount. So if you're going to a relatively high level firm and they're charging you $2,000 per tax return, well, now you're in $10,000 deep for your tax preparation.
It's not making you any money. And this goes back to the first question to tie it all in. So,
exactly. Yeah. So then it starts to be like, well, maybe this isn't a good fit, but then there's structuring you can do, and this is something that Kathryn and I have coordinated on several mutual clients, is maybe creating a holding company structure, which the tax implications are all the same as far as the income flows through, it's taxed on the owner's personal income tax returns, but maybe it can simplify your life as far as number of filings that need to be made.
Gotcha. And in the end, it's all a balancing act between the different aspects.
Exactly.
No right or wrong
so
answer
be insured,
across the board.
Talk to your attorney, and hopefully not pay taxes. All right, we got it. That's what we heard. So, all right, what do we got, Jack? What's number 3?
All right, so this is Brian's question.
Brian, shout out to Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Brian is interested in the rent-to-own dynamic from a landlord's perspective. Are they more trouble than they're worth? Do you advise against them? Are 1031s possible when divesting a property in this way?
Can we clarify? Rent-to-own meaning the person you're buying it from is actually the lender and the seller of the property, because like a seller financing, but your owner you're living in it as well, right?
Yeah.
So the true rent-to-own. Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Kory, when we start with you, because I don't know, I actually don't know. I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah.
I know it's very common. I know a few people have done it, but what other? This is interesting. Is there any tax because you're technically the tenant and the owner, right?
Well, yeah. Well, in rent-to-own, you're not the owner from a tax and legal perspective. You're not the owner until the option to buy has actually been exercised. So,
oh, really?
So perhaps you're paying a fee up front to have this option to buy by a certain date, or you're paying a monthly fee to keep this option open, but you don't actually have title. Title's not transferred until that option is actually exercised, whatever mechanism it's agreed upon that's going to happen. So at the moment that option is exercised, or there's a bunch of reasons that the IRS might deem that it was exercised, at that point it switches from just a regular typical rental property into now the property has been sold. And then it looks into, okay, well now it's not just, that the landlord owns this property and is renting it out, but he sold it for a note. Now, and he owes money now to the seller of the property, and he's going to continue to make payments on the note, or the buyer is going to go and get a standard mortgage to buy off the amount. But as far as how it all rolls into a 1031, it's definitely on the messy side. And the reason it's on the messy side is now this person owes you money once that option is exercised. The way that the 1031 works is the proceeds from your sale, which includes an installment note, need to go to that qualified intermediary. And
so you're not touching it. Right?
Exactly. So you're not touching
that
it.
Makes sense. So that does get complicated.
Yeah. So before the option gets exercised, you need to be having conversations with that 1031 intermediary and getting them involved with the process. And then when it's actually executed, the installment note, the loan actually goes to the intermediary, and then you need to figure out, well, how the heck am I going to take this note and turn it into cash, or be able to roll that into another property. So whether it's you buy that note in cash from the intermediary, then clearly you need a bit of money on hand in order to do it. You find a seller of a property who's willing to take the note in exchange. Or
that does get back. I can see where that, yeah, okay.
Or you find a bank that will buy the note. It's definitely messy.
messy.
It's not something that I've ever actually seen done, just heard about, but it's it definitely becomes a lot more tricky because then you need to figure out, well, how am I going to dispose of this installment note? And you have, with a 1031, it's a relatively short window to sort all that out and roll it into the replacement property.
What I heard was if Brian's going to do this, he should see you because that's a lot of billable hours for you. So you're going
exactly.
to run him up the flagpole.
I'll make it not worth it.
Keith and Kathryn, anything unique about this on you guys? I mean, feel free to jump in. Is there anything unique about this on you?
From my perspective, there's really two ways. When I heard this question, rent to own, I had a different structure in mind. So from a legal perspective, there are several different ways you can structure a rent to own situation, and they would each be documented separately. So both parties should really look into that early on to make sure that your interests are protected. Either with some, if you are the renter, and you are paying a monthly rent where a part of that rent acts as a down payment against a future option or a future contract, then you want to make sure that there is some security so the landlord can't sell that property out from underneath you. And vice versa, if you are the owner of the property, you want to make sure that that is documented properly so that if the buyer does not fulfill their obligations, you know what your recourse is, and you're not left out in the wind.
Good to know. Anything unique about it from insurance?
There's only one, I mean, not really. There's one key aspect to it, though. When you traditionally get a loan from a bank, at closing, you need to provide an insurance binder to actually transfer the property over to the buyer. And when you do an insurance binder, you list the bank or the lender as a lost P or a mortgagee. And what that means is if there's any type of insurance payouts, the bank or the lender,
their lien gets satisfied first.
They get paid the money, not the individual that's buying the property. Now, when you look at it from a seller financing perspective or rent to own, when you go into the closing, the seller now is listed as the lost P or the mortgagee. So if there's any insurance payouts, they're going to go to the seller until that property is paid off and it's completely under the ownership of the buyer. No real change, but just a little bit different
So
setup.
after he gets Kory's bill and Kathy's legal advice, he burns it down and he gets the payout to get out of the bad decision of doing the rent to own. Okay, I got it. All right, that's how we do it. Insurance fraud, everybody. All right, moving on because we're up against it. Number 4, what do we got?
All right, number 4. How would you handle house hacking? LLC versus sole proprietorship, tax implications and search implications.
House hacking, and I want to put a caveat on this. What if you were also short-term renting your other unit in your house hack? How would you handle that? Because may not be doing that.
So, Mike.
Yes.
What is a house hack?
Oh, that's a good point. So a house hack is basically where you're renting out part of your primary residence to lower your cost of living while also living at the property. So that's something that I think is the best catalyst to start building wealth. I think a lot of successful investors have started with that method. I house hack now. I mean, we have an in-law apartment. They pay more towards a mortgage than we do. I know of a lot of successful investors. I have a good friend who Airbnbs and rents an in-law in his house and then lives in the primary residence. So he's got 3 things going on all in this one residence. So as you're looking at that, I mean, to jump into that, Keith, I'll kick it off with you. That sounds like a smorgasbord. How do you handle that?
So it's really not.
Get homeowner's insurance and then look the other way.
Exactly. I'm not doing anything.
Right off the bat, I got to say I love the term house hacking because when I first heard it, my mind went to all kinds of crazy stuff like demolition and vandalism and all this stuff. And then when I realized what it is, it's actually what we call in the insurance world owner-occupied. And owner-occupied properties are actually very favorable to insurance companies because statistically they have a lower rate of claims.
So the people who have to put down the less amount of money you think care the most? Your whole industry's ass backwards. So there it is. Oh, my God.
So the benefit of house hacking or being owner-occupied is you're going to get preferred insurance rates. Like I said, statistically, when it's owner-occupied, there's less negative things that happen. So insurance companies reward you for that, and they offer discounted rates.
Okay, well, let me flip it on its head before we put a caveat, because I just thought about my own primary residence. We don't own that in an LLC. So I'm up here talking, Michael Ketchen, real estate investor. I'm going, holy shit, am I fucking up now? So I've got it. It's a primary mortgage, but now liability, my tenant slips, falls on my primary residence. This is the one asset I actually don't own in an LLC. Am I now piercing my own corporate veil, or is it so lower level because I have standard insurance? What do you recommend for that from the legal and tax standpoint? Should that be in an LLC?
So there are different rules and different benefits of your primary residence versus your income property. And this is kind of a blend of the two.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
Okay.
for example, in every state in which I practice, there are these things called homestead rights.
Okay.
Which protect the equity in your property against the home being foreclosed by a judgment creditor. That
Fancy way of saying someone
benefit-
suing you or something? Is
yeah,
that?
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
That's
All right.
exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly right. So that is not available to you if you own it in an LLC, for example.
Yeah.
Kory will tell us whether the deferral or non-payment of taxes on the sale of your primary residence is available, and that's a big benefit of
Yeah.
house hacking for primary residence.
Yep.
Is because your
2
gain
year step up,
because
you mean.
your gain is not taxable or is deferred.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure you can do that in an LLC. Can you, Kory?
Yeah, well, as far as the primary, I don't think I have any clients that actually hold their primary residence in an LLC for the purpose of house hacking. It's just
Agreed.
not a very common practice. You're probably just incurring an unnecessary annual state fee to do so.
In addition to which, before I forget, sorry for interrupting, you also typically, you may not, but typically, there is a mortgage on that house.
Yeah.
And that is a residential mortgage, which is not, you can't be an LLC and get a residential mortgage.
I got
At least a
another good
Fannie
point that
Freddie
goes through it.
mortgage.
Yep. Okay, gotcha.
So I'm
Yep.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as far as the income tax side of things, it wouldn't matter if it was in an LLC or not. It's treated the same way with the personal use. As far as what the personal use means, to not get into the details on it, but the IRS requires you to allocate your expenses in a reasonable manner, whether it's by the square footage that's 100% for rental use or by the number of rooms that are 100% for rental use versus the rest of the building. If it's 1,000 square feet being rented versus 3,000 square foot total, okay, 1/3 of your total property expenses would be applicable against your rental income. Same thing for depreciation and those kinds of things where you're able to take that, in that example, 1/3 slice of it. And there are a few different ways to allocate. It's usually a good idea to just take a look at, well, what's going to be the way that's allowed explicitly by the IRS and that will get me the best benefit. So it's always worth looking at. And then, of course, direct expenses. If you have expenses that are 100% for the rented unit, those expenses are 100% deductible. They wouldn't have the same split. But even, if you look at like landscaping, the same thing in that example. You get a 1/3 split, or your plow bill or utilities, any of those shared expenses for the full property.
Gotcha.
As far as, wait.
I didn't mean to
go
cut you
ahead.
off. I was
Go
going to say,
ahead.
but what came to mind there, does any of that change if you're using the house hacking unit as a short-term rental versus a primary versus a standard rental? Does any of that change? Maybe not necessarily in the legal standpoint, but on the insurance or the tax standpoint?
On the tax standpoint, it will depend on the level of services or really what you're providing to folks while they're staying in that short-term rental. If you're operating closer to a bed and breakfast, that will change. Potentially now you have, or very likely now you have
business or something.
you have a self-employment income. So
Gotcha.
you pay potentially higher taxes on that if you're just renting out a room and all you're doing is opening the door and say, there you are. It just to answer your question as well as far as what happens when you sell this. So when you sell a primary residence, if you meet certain holding period requirements, you get to exclude a portion of your gain. So if you're single, that's $250,000 of your gain that's tax-free. If you're married, that's $500,000 tax-free. When you have a portion of the property that's rented, then it starts to get split and bifurcated between, well, this piece is not, so you might
Government
not
can't
get
do
the full
anything
benefit.
nice.
Exactly,
Of course.
exactly.
All right, well, we want to thank you guys tremendously for being here. All right, I think we're going to
Tremendously.
jump off on that note because that was so much to process. I really hope we get to do this again at some point with this panel and to walk everybody through listening at home. This is my process. So when Commonwealth Collective or Central Acquisitions or any other LLCs get a property in a contract, first we call Kathryn, make sure it's legal. Then we call Kory to see if we're going to have to pay taxes or not. And then we call Keith to make sure if it does burn down, we got plenty of insurance. So all jokes aside, that is part of the dream team. That's what we wanted to bring to the Tell Us Why community, kind of go through that panel.
I have the same
Anything?
process, except it's Mike then.
Yeah, anybody know? That's your own posture. So, like I said, again, thank you guys all for being here. And no quote of the week. So just want to take us home.
That's it.
Go from there. We'll check it out next time.
Be sure to join us next week. Until next week.
Bet on yourself.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.